Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Micah, and today we are continuing in the Cloud Resume Challenge, and we will be creating unit tests for our Python code by mocking AWS services. So let's quickly define a few things. So unit tests are small, isolated code segments designed to verify the functionality of individual components, like our visitor counter function, to ensure they are working as expected. Mocking is a process of creating simulated or artificial components, or mocks, to mimic the behavior of real components in a system. When we write code, we expect that code to function in a certain way. When creating tests for our code, we want to create scenarios that will potentially cause our code to function in unintended ways. So once we determine what scenarios could potentially break our code or alter its expected output, we can implement error handling to account for those scenarios. So creating tests for our code validates that we are correctly handling any potential errors that could arise during code execution. So the first scenario that we will be testing is passing our function an empty table. Okay, so we've created a script for our first scenario, and we're going to create an empty table using Moto 3 in Python. So we're going to use the create table function, pass attribute definitions, define the key schema, and then we're going to create an empty table called test empty table. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, and so from our response, it looks like the creation was successful. Let's go into our console and let's refresh the UI. Okay, so we have our test empty table, perfect. And we see if we explore the table items, there are no items inside of the table. So it is indeed empty. So let's go back to our Python code. Let's run our visitor counter script with the empty table. And let's see exactly what happens. So we get an error. We get an index error list index out of the range. So basically what's happening is this is the response that we're getting back from, or that we want to get back from our table. It has the items in it, it has the visitor counter ID or the key, it has the value, but we are getting back this instead, pretty much. So an empty array with no items in it. So our code is actually looking for, our code is actually looking for this first item inside of this array. So when we can't return the first item or any items because there's nothing in there, we get the index error. So what do we do about this? We're going to implement some error handling inside of our code. We're going to add a try and except statement real quick. And I have the code over here in this other window. So now we're going to try response or to scan the table. And if this, if this is successful, then we get our items back. If not, it raises an index error and it sets the count to 0. And with this updated count, we can then update our item because this edits an existing item's attributes or adds new item to the table if it does not already exist. So this is perfect for us. We were just missing the count value being returned in the previous code. So let's see exactly what happens now. So we get our status code 200, and we can verify that our table was updated correctly by refreshing this page. And we see we have our visitor count and our ID in our visitor count, which is 0 because we set it to 0 in our code. So that is working as intended. Now, when we pass an empty table to our visitor counter function, we will still be able to have the value that we were expecting initially without the error. So that is working as intended. Perfect. So the second scenario that we will be testing is passing our function a non-existent table. So you can see here I have two tables, this test empty table and this visitor count table. I'm going to pass this non-existent table to our function as the table name, and we'll see exactly what happens. Okay, so we get this resource not found exception error, obviously, because this resource does not exist. So we're going to add some more error handling. So we're going to add an exception here for the resource not found exception. So it's going to create a table, an empty table, and then it's going to create a count, and obviously the update item will pass that count to the empty table. So let's go ahead and try this. I think one thing that I may need to do is import time. And so after this table creation has completed, I'm gonna sleep it for a little bit, like 30 seconds, just so it gives the table creation activity enough time to actually create the table for provision and whatever before it updates the item. So let's see what happens. Okay, it looks like that worked. We have our status code 200. This is the error from earlier, and then we have a successful request. So let's go to AWS, refresh, and we should see a non-existent table, and we should see a count also. Perfect. So the third and final scenario is passing our function a table with an invalid schema. So what do I mean by invalid schema? Basically, in our update item function, we are passing, or we have a defined key of type number. And if we create a table with a primary key of type binary or type string, we get a certain error that is returned. So let's go ahead and test that scenario right now. So I have another script and using Moto 3 in Python, and we're going to create a table that has a primary key of type binary. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And it should create a table called test binary schema table. I also have another script that will create us a table with a string schema, or a primary key that is of type string. So once this gets done, I'll run this as well, and we can test both of them to make sure our code works as intended. So that was successful. The first one, the binary creation one, we can go ahead and check that. So there's the test binary schema table. And we have the test string schema table as well that has successfully been created right here. Okay, so I'm going to pass in the table name with the invalid schema, and let's clear our console. And we'll see the exact error that is returned. Okay, perfect. So as promised, more errors. So we have a validation exception error, and we have some code that will help us handle that. So before we get to the update item, the very last thing in our code, we will use this get key schema function to describe the table that's passed to it, returning the partition key and the partition key type. So we're going to use the describe table function in Moto 3, which returns information about the table, when it was created, the status of the table, and most importantly, the primary key schema. So we have the partition key name from the response and the partition key type from the response. So if the partition key type of the table that we pass to it is binary, we have a predefined binary value to set as the partition key value. So we're creating a new key based on the type that is returned. So if we have binary, we have this value here. If we have string or number, we have this value here. And then we're creating a key based on the type of the partition key. And then we return the key in our function. So then this update item will use not this key, but the key that is returned from the function. So we're going to do this instead. All right, so let's go ahead and run the code one more time and see what happens. Okay, perfect. So now we have our visitor count. So let's go into the test binary schema table, and we should see our count. And the test string schema is empty because we haven't ran this table through our function yet. So let's go ahead and test this as well. Okay, looks like that worked. We can check in our items and hit refresh. And now we see our visitor count. So I went ahead and deleted all of the tables that we created so that we have a clean workspace, and for another reason that I will show you in a second. All right, so now we've seen scenarios that have caused our visitor count function to fail. And you saw the manual labor that goes into creating scripts and creating resources and modifying our visitor count script and doing all of this work. But that's not the most efficient way. The most efficient way to do our tests is to mock AWS services, and we can do so in a single script without having to create real AWS resources. So let's do that now. Okay, so I went ahead and reverted this visitor count local file to the first revision where, you know, we had all the errors and stuff. There's no error handling, and I renamed it to V1. So this will be in my GitHub repository, and our V2 has all of the error handling and things that we've implemented during this video. So that's just as a reference, but our tests, which I was just referencing, lives here in the tests directory. So let's open that, and we can close this. So let's talk about testing for a second. So we're using Moto, which is a library that allows you to test your AWS services by mocking or creating fake AWS resources to play with. So the first thing that we have to do is import our visitor count function from the visitor count local v2 py script into our test script. So we use this init.py file, which is just an empty file, and it serves to mark this directory, this source directory, as a Python package that we can use to import. So back in our tests, close that. We set the path for this local package import using this line here. And for every test, we will be importing from source, import visitor counter local as VC. And then you'll see us run the function here using that package import as VC and then the function name. All right, so just a little bit of background for the tests. So for every test, the structure is going to be creating an input and then execute the code being tested and then capturing the output. And then we are comparing the output with the expected result. So our expected result is that anytime we run this visitor count function, it will return a count. And that's the whole purpose, so that we can display the count on our website. So our input for this first test, which is a test empty table, is creating a table. And then we, define the attribute, the key schema, whatever. And then we pass that table, which is test table, table name right here, to our visitor count function. And then we're going to scan, and then we should have a count. And so this true false is saying whether this object is an instance of this class. So this count should be a string based on the scan results. And we are asserting that this statement will be true. And we do the same pretty much for every other test. So we have the test table does not exist. We're actually not creating a table. We're just passing the table name variable, this test table string. And obviously our code should be able to handle this. So when we do our scan and get the scan results back, we should have a count regardless of if this table exists or not. And then lastly, the test schema validation error, which we saw earlier, we will be passing a table that has a primary key that is different than the primary key value that is, or type that is defined in our function. So we have in the function, I believe it's an attribute type of number. We're actually creating an attribute table with an attribute or primary key attribute type of binary. And then we're passing that table to our visitor count function. And again, obviously we should be able to handle that based on the code changes that we made previously. So yeah, that is testing. And when you create or mock AWS services, none of this is created in your account, and we'll see that here in a few. So let's go ahead and run our tests and make sure that everything's working as intended. So we're going to use Pytest, which is a testing framework. It allows us to utilize some test runners that will execute our tests. So we're going to do Pytest -v for verbose or verbosity. Whoops. There we go. So the session has started, and it reads the tests that are located in the test directory, and they have to start, I believe, with the test prefix. So first one passed. The second one passed. And our last test passed as well. So obviously if I passed, or if I imported the V1 that does not have the error handling and changes that we implemented, these tests would not pass. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you learned a lot. I hope this was helpful in some way. And to prove that no real resources were created, we can go into DynamoDB and we go to our tables, and we see we only have the visitor count table. Let me know where you are in the Cloud Resume Challenge. I would love to, see how everyone is doing, if you're following along or if you've already completed it. Leave a comment down below and that would be awesome. So with that, I want to thank you for watching. I appreciate you. Stay blessed. Have a great day. See you on the next video.